So I've been pondering, who else is going to join Cross Guild? Now, throughout the month of October, I have made many a video about Perona and Moria joining Cross Guild. You've probably noticed the Perona thumbnails if you are a fan of the channel. Or if this is your first time watching any of my content, yeah, there are a ton of Perona thumbnail videos talking about various Perona and Moria related things. Most of those being her and him joining Cross Guild. This has a bit of legs because we found out in the last Vivicard drop that, yeah, Perona was going to be in the initial joining of Cross Guild, but that was changed. So it's very likely that that's going to come around in the future because we know now that she and Moria have escaped Blackbeard's territory. So that is where they will most likely go. With that being said, the last time we saw Cross Guild, the Marines and the other Seraphim that we don't have names for were heading towards Empty Bluff Island. I do think this is going to be where Empty Bluff Island is abandoned after a skirmish, and that's probably where Moria and Perona will show up with Thriller Bark. I do think very wholeheartedly that Thriller Bark is going to be the new base of Cross Guild. Another reason why it wouldn't make sense for Cross Guild to relocate to Thriller Bark as their main base is because we see that Crocodile was listening in on Vegapunk's message. So at least we know that he knows that the world is going to flood. So to protect the business and ensure its longevity, he would secure something that will rise with the ocean's level no matter what. That being a giant fortress like Thriller Bark, which is a big boat. So I think it's going to be Crocodile who suggests that they relocate to Thriller Bark. But with that being said, the reason why I'm so adamant about Cross Guild taking on Thriller Bark as their main base is because Thriller Bark is a moving island. It's a moving base. So that means they will be less detectable because they're always on the move. This has strengths over a solitary island, given that they are in the business of hunting Marines, or at least giving out bounties for Marines, right? So it makes sense that if you're in that business where you're at the position of being the main proprietor of giving out bounties for the strong arm of the world government, it will only make sense for you to constantly be moving around so you are easily detected and easily invaded. Because we've seen many times before, even though other characters have significant strength and by all means can take out whole armies, they are still invaded. That is why Mihawk left the Gloomy Kingdom. It's not a matter of not being able to destroy whole armadas of ships. It's a matter of constantly being annoyed. So if Empty Bluff is constantly being invaded, that kind of goes against Mihawk's principles. It doesn't really make sense. So that's why I think he would jump at the idea of having Thriller Bark as their new base, because that means they're constantly moving around, and that gives him the solitary, peaceful life that he desires. Then two, it's a solitary kingdom in a weird way, so it would be a utopia for Crocodile, or at least it leads into his whole idea of having a utopia, which Thriller Bark is, an independent utopia that can be molded to the wishes of the group. Which by that I mean it's probably going to be muscled out of Moria's control in being like a spooky Halloween graveyard, and more so a castle town surrounded by various circus tents. But that's pretty cool and that's pretty neat regardless. But it will be also a constantly surveilled island, much like Tuttleland with its sea slugs, because of Perona's ghost network. We saw during Thriller Bark that she was an excellent scout because she could see through all the ghosts that she spawned around Thriller Bark. So it will be highly protected, making Perona very, very useful. Now, on top of that, I do think Thriller Bark is going to turn into a bigger, flashier version of the Thousand Sunny, because the Thousand Sunny has various docking systems in which it has smaller vessels within it, right? That's where I think the Big Top Blaster is going to go. The Big Top Blaster is just going to be a bigger variant of one of those smaller ships that are at Luffy's disposal, which makes sense because Bucky's whole thing is being grandiose and flashy. So yeah, the Big Top Blaster is not going to go anywhere, and it probably will be considered the main scouting ship, whereas Thriller Bark is the mothership. Now, on the topic of ships, this brings me to who I think is going to join Cross Guild. I think Neomads are going to join Cross Guild. Now, in the past, I've had various videos on them. I've said maybe York was going to join Cross Guild. I've said that they will possibly be employed by Shiki. And I had this entire big video about Law and Kid possibly joining Cross Guild. But the more I thought about it, which is a shame because it was a whole big like hour-long video, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense, because one, Cross Guild, even though there are a lot of warlords in Cross Guild, a lot of those warlords were independent arc antagonists, and some of them didn't start off as warlords. Like, for example, Buggy. Buggy was not a warlord when he first entered the story. Neither was Alvita, and she technically is an arc boss. She became a co-captain of Buggy's and then just became a part of Buggy's delivery service as he constantly rose in rank, and now she simply is a part of Cross Guild. So I say all that to say, in terms of arc antagonists, Neomads is made out of those at the moment, which is interesting because one, we have Caesar Clown, and two, we have a mini arc antagonist in Vinsmoke Judge. Also, they too have a moving base. The German Kingdom is just a collection of giant snails. So, on the topic of having a moving base that is undetectable, they fit the same criteria as Thriller Bark. So, with that being said, I think it's very possible that if they were to join forces, you could possibly make Thriller Bark even bigger, or at least the small island in the center of Thriller Bark even bigger. And now you would have an even more wide range unit that can go off and do things and be in different parts of the world. Because as you know, the giant snails that make up the German Kingdom can actually go up the red line. So I think that only increases the amount of availability that the Cross Guild would have. On top of that, I think their paths do cross because Caesar Clown and Vinsmoke Judge are ones who tend to float towards being employed or having a very reliable revenue of capital for their various ventures, which that is what Cross Guild would technically provide, as they are a very money-orientated organization based on them giving out bounties for Marines. So in that way, that does make a lot of sense. And two, they're very weirdly neutral in terms of other criminal organizations, as various members of Blackbeard's entourage were saying how they could turn in, say, Kobe or Garp for a Cross Guild bounty. So that makes me think that it will be very on brand for Vinsmoke Judge and Caesar Clown to join Cross Guild, because they've basically been in a similar situation before when they were together with Vegapunk in the original Mads organization. They had a benefactor in Lufeld who was a part of the Underworld, and the Underworld is also helping to fund Cross Guild as far as we know, or at least the connections that Crocodile has are helping to fund Cross Guild. So it would make sense for Neomads to just fall back into a very familiar fold. So this goes back to the idea too that they would possibly be like the Sunny, because the various ships of the German kingdom can too just act as little squad ships, little scouting ships that go out and do various things like conducting deals all across the world. That's why I push so hard for this. Now, on the topic of being thematical, it's very interesting how on brand three of these organizations are to one another, because Thriller Bark, Caesar Clown on Punk Hazard, and the German Kingdom all have one thing in common. All of them specialize in having a large amount of a particular drone unit. What do I mean by that? Well, thanks to the power of the Shadow Fruit, we have zombies being the primary denizen and the primary manpower of the Thriller Bark arc. Then on Punk Hazard, we have a very similar situation thanks to Caesar Clown's Silver Tongue and the abilities of the Op-Out Fruit. We have many of centaurs and harpies and all these faux mythical creatures that inhabit both sides of the island. Mostly the winter side, but still, same thing is happening. And then Germa, much like Thriller Bark, can produce its own drones as they have an actual cloning machine that can pump out soldiers. It's very interesting too that given the similarities between the Soul Fruit and the Shadow Fruit, we are entering a very similar situation in which Moria is going to potentially have access to a bunch of mindless shells that will do what he says, but I think it's an upgrade and may kind of play into his character changing, that instead of these being zombies, they turn out to be actual people. That's why I say all this is on brand, because the Germa clones are very much like the zombies and the weird faux mythical creatures of Punk Hazard before them. So in terms of thematics, in terms of manpower, we would have that in spades thanks to the German Kingdom. And I think it fits the theme because it kind of goes into the whole mad scientist vibe that Moria basically had with Hogback. Now, do I think Hogback will be a part of this moving forward? I hope he's not, because I hate him. He might be. It's very possible. And that kind of connects us into whom I want to talk about next in terms of the various other people who I think are going to join Cross Guild because of Neomaz being a part of the organization. Let's continue. So moving down the list, we have Buckingham Stussy, her son Edward Weevil, Vegapunk, Lilith, and then Cyan, also known as Queen, the former Beast Pirate. The reason why I chose these guys is because mostly, it would make sense for all of them to be in a revitalized mass organization. Secondly, we know that Buckingham Stussy and Vegapunk Lilith are motivated by money. So, much like Caesar Clown and Vince Smoke Judge, who have a habit of being in the position of having a benefactor, which thinking about it now is very funny that both of them have had the same benefactor in the past, that being Big Mom, because Vince Smoke Judge wanted power through her based on a political marriage, and of course Caesar Clown just wanted capital. So yeah, moving on though. I think these two would fit the theme very nicely given the nature of Cross Guild as an organization. Now, with Queen, also known as Cyan, and Edward Weevil, we do have a very interesting relationship, and both of them being possibly liposucked by Green Bull, but they both most likely are in Impel Down. Now, there's been a lot of talk I've heard over the years now that possibly there could be a Cross Guild break-in of Impel Down. Do I think that is likely? I'm on the fence. I do think there'll be a second massive breakout of Impel Down. Whether or not Cross Guild is a part of that, I am unsure, but I do think circumstances are going to occur in which at least Cyan, also known as Queen, and Edward Weevil do find their way back to Cross Guild, because of the people that they are associated with who will already be a part of Cross Guild most likely. I could see that happening though. I really could see that. There's also a bit about Doflamingo possibly joining. I've done videos on that. They may have not posted yet, but I've talked about that. I am one of two minds about it. Either it'll be him or it will be the presumed F Flamingo that is supposedly invading Empty Bluff Island as we speak. So either way, I think either one could work. I don't think it will ever be both, but one or the other I think is very possible. But now bring it back to Vegapunk Lilith and spoilers for the end of Egghead and the first half of Elbaf. We do know that she is with the Straw Hats at the moment. I think some circumstances will occur that will allow her to break off and do her own thing and probably join Cross Guild based on Neo Mads being now a part of Cross Guild. Maybe she hears about it. But I do think that will be her place moving forward in the future, simply because I think with her being the evil aspect of Vegapunk and her having a very money oriented personality, that she would want a safe haven to continue her experiments without constantly being under the threat of being hunted by the world government. This would be very interesting too, because I wonder how the relationship will be between her and the former members of Mads and this new Neo Mads under Cross Guild, because she may have a particular more agreeable outlook than Vegapunk had due to certain experiments, because she's supposed to be the evil aspect, even though she doesn't seem evil at all. But maybe evil in this context means she's less morally just than the main Vegapunk. Perhaps that is it. Whereas Vegapunk York, who unfortunately might just be going to the world government at this rate, is actually evil. So I think it will be a very interesting play to see her play nice with characters like Queen and Caesar Clown and Judge. Also, I just wanted to mention there is a possible connection between Vegapunk and Hogback, because in chapter 1072, while a flashback is going on between Vegapunk reflecting on what he once told Kuma, he says, "That's right, a scholar in the West Blue once said that people lose 21 grams of weight after they die. In other words, that is the weight of a human soul. The soul really exists. Can we observe it? It's so fascinating." So I think in that conversation, he's referring to Dr. Hogback, because Dr. Hogback is from the West Blue, and Thriller Bark does go into a lot of detail about souls and death, as the shadow is referred to as a type of soul. So in that way, it's very interesting that Lilith could track us back to Moria in a way, if this was indeed mentioning Hogback, which I think it is, because he's the most prominent and well-renowned scholar out of the West Blue as far as we know. On top of that, I do wonder what her relationship could possibly be with the various clones that the Germa have at their disposal, seeing as how she too is technically like them, a living person who technically is a clone of another person. Maybe this could start to change how the Germa clones are treated by the upper brass of the organization, because now they have someone who is like them that can relate to them. So maybe now they won't be treated as cannon fodder or whatnot. That'll still possibly be the case, but I'm willing to see what changes are going to be made just based on her nature as an individual. Now, on that topic of the clones, I think what bolsters Neo Mads joining Cross Guild even more is that Crocodile is looking for military strength. So what better military strength to have than an actual private army in having the German kingdom at Cross Guild's disposal that can constantly make foot soldiers. On top of that, of course, we have the crown jewel of the German kingdom being the Germa siblings, Reiju, Yonji, Niji, and Ichiji. So I just think it makes a lot of sense to have all of them because it plays into what Crocodile actually wants. And it further promotes Buggy's ambition of being Pirate King, because in order to be Pirate King, you need a strong military backing. You need power. So I think all that fits fairly well. So based on these characters that I'm proposing for Cross Guild, you can start to look at them kind of like a traditional crew, because there are a lot of people here now that fit some very interesting spots. For example, in terms of having a shipwright, I think Cyan, also known as Queen, would be the shipwright of Cross Guild and possibly be responsible for making this giant mothership of Thriller Bark that I'm proposing, because much like his supposed son, Cuddy Flam, also known as Frankie, which would also be a very cool narrative thing going on there. On one end, you have Frankie working for the Straw Hats, but on the other end, you have his father, Cyan, working for Cross Guild. But I think based on what we have seen from him and how he's so adept in using cybernetics, that seems to be his main forte, even though a lot of it is just copying off a judge. But still, seeing as how he's such a premier cyborg, it would make sense for him to be the shipwright. Following him, we have our potential helmsman in Vegapunk Lilith, because she was the one who was always designated by Vegapunk Stella to operate the Vega Force 1. So she is often being presented as someone who can pilot vehicles. She even has a little pilot helmet. So she most likely will be our helmsman. Following her, of course, Mihawk is the swordsman. He is the big backbone of the military might of Cross Guild, I would say. Now, in terms of a navigator, I'd give it to Perona, because based on her various quite amazing feats of navigation throughout the story so far, like she was the reason why Zoro got back to Sabaody first. I've recently done a video on that, so yeah, I think she would make an excellent navigator. In terms of chefs, we have Cassette and Epony from the German Kingdom. So with the German Kingdom being a part of Cross Guild, we got chefs already on lock. Now, when you're talking about doctors, I would honestly give it to Caesar Clown over Judge, because Caesar Clown has been shown to be more of a medical doctor based on what he does on Zoe, what he does for Chopper, and improving his Rumble Ball. So I would say he is more of a medical doctor in the traditional sense, as opposed to Judge. Also, it's very funny that he has horns like Chopper. No one ever brings that up. Why does Caesar Clown have horns? And they're not like a weird attachment or whatever. They're literally growing out of his head. But then again, too, they aren't flesh tone like Moria's. So I've always thought that he was some sort of half mink. And we're going to talk about that in another video. But yeah, we got a horned doctor, just like on the Straw Hat crew. And he's a funny parody of Chopper because he's terrible, which is very funny. But continuing. Now, moving forward with other positions, it's a bit of a toss-up, namely when you're talking about sniper and musician, because when it comes to archaeologists, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say they're just going to pay for information. They don't really need an archaeologist as a pirate ship, or they're going to strong arm other organizations for poneglyph rubbings. Now, who can read them, I don't know, but maybe that will come up in the future. Don't really know about that. But in terms of musician and sniper, it's a bit weird, because sniper, as I've talked about in the past, could fall to Buggy, because the weapon I would say that he's most known for at the moment are his Muggy Balls. And seeing as how they are a creation of his own, and potentially the Buggy Balls before them were also his own creation, he's got more of a knack for mixing and making ammo than we first thought. So with that being said, I would say in this situation, yeah, the captain of the organization technically is the sniper, because he takes a lot of pride in using those Muggy Balls. So that's what I would say. Now, in terms of musician, it's a bit of a crapshoot, because there's no one that I have mentioned so far that has any musical talent. The best case scenario is that they get Apu. So yes, that does mean that Apu and Queen would be a part of the same organization yet again, which I would like to see how that bad blood is mended, because they do work very well together, as that concert in Onigashima was sick. But yeah, to continue. And I want to say, I mentioned this in my first anniversary video, that it's very, very possible that in the future they get Apu, who uses NB as a bargaining chip to get into Cross Guild, seeing as how Buggy's delivery service did lose the new giant pirates. And he lost them to Luffy, which is very funny, but also adds to the whole idea that, yeah, Cross Guild does mirror the Straw Hats in a very odd way. But it's also very interesting to consider that it would sweeten the deal, because one ancient giant is potentially more valuable than 5 normal giants, because an ancient giant is already bigger than 2 giants stacked on top of each other. So that in itself is very interesting. But to continue on with character relationships, there are a lot of character relationships that can be gleaned just from NB being here, because Gecko Moria would be very interested in MB, because we know he likes ancient giants. He might also see it as a feather in his cap that a former subordinate of Kaido is now working under him. But to continue, I don't think he would want to turn NB into a zombie, because if I'm correct, and Moria does go through a bit of a character transformation in being around a living crew once again, he would just value MB's strength as opposed to wanting to kill him and then turn him into a zombie. I don't think he would be on that at all. But it's interesting to think about that we would technically have all these character relationships just based off of one character possibly joining. On the topic of character relationships, going back to Apu, the reason why, too, I think he would fit very well into Cross Guild is because, unlike Law and Kid, he has been in an antagonistic position, and he is very much like, say, Galdino or Buggy, in which, even though he is strong, he's very opportunistic and he's always got a scheme going. So that's why I think he would fit more here as opposed to anywhere else, because he doesn't seem sadistic enough or righteous enough to join a faction like the Blackbeard Pirates. And of course, he's not going to join the Grand Fleet. So this makes sense for him to join Cross Guild, because they're kind of a menagerie of serious guys, but also funny little buddies. And he's in between those two types of characters. It would also be very interesting to see Weevil as a part of this organization, because we do know that Crocodile has a relationship with Whitebeard. We don't know where Whitebeard defeated Crocodile, but we know Whitebeard is a significant figure in Crocodile's life. So I think it would be fitting to have the supposed son of Whitebeard working under Crocodile. Now, I'm not sure if Crocodile is the type of character who would really be jazzed for this, but in this way, it is giving kind of a Garp raising Ace vibe, as Ace was the son of Garp's greatest rival in Roger. So in this way, Crocodile would be raising, or at least helping to establish, the son of a previous rival in Whitebeard. Not sure if Crocodile is the type of character for that, but seeing as how he's here amongst all these cartoon characters in Cross Guild already, it's showing that he does have more layers to him. But to continue, and what would be very interesting too is that if he was liposucked by Green Bull, it would be super funny that where there was doubt before that he was Whitebeard's son because he was so robust, now that he's lost a significant amount of weight, he looks exactly like Edward Newgate, otherwise known as Whitebeard. So I think that's a gag waiting to happen. It was also very interesting that Buckingham Stussy pleaded to Marco that if you wanted to know if Whitebeard really was the father of Edward Weevil, you should go ask Vegapunk. Well, now she's working with a Vegapunk, so maybe Lilith would know in this supposed scenario, if they do become a part of Cross Guild, that yes, Weevil is the son of Whitebeard. And I know Weevil has never technically been an antagonist in any capacity, but seeing as how there's so many character relationships that could be had with him being a part of Cross Guild, I think it's a good idea. And he was a warlord, so he does fit that criteria, if we're calling that a criteria. But I think that would be very interesting to happen. So with that being said, let's tally up all our confirmed members. Following that, let's tally up all the members whom I think are going to join in the near future. So at the tippity top, we have the leaders of Cross Guild being Buggy, Crocodile, and Dracula Mihawk. Following them, we have our other members in Das Bones, Galdino, Alvita, Moji, Richie, and Kabaji. Now, let's tally off our unconfirmed members. They go as follows. We have Caesar Clown, then Smoke Judge, then Smoke Reiju, then Smoke Yonji, then Smoke Ichiji, then Smoke Niji. Following them, we have Gecko Moria and Perona, which are then followed by Apu and Enby. Then we have Buckingham Stussy and her son, Edward Weevil. Following them, we have Vegapunk Lilith. And lastly, we have Cyan, otherwise known as Queen. So with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Works.